tonight is the first of 4 in-person meetings. There will also be 2 virtual meetings at the end of the process to review the proposed recommendations and incorporate public input into the proposals. Tonight, we will be discussing various governance models of water systems and reviewing the existing organization agreements for the water system. Tonight's meeting will not require a vote of task force members, but future meetings will. And now, let me introduce our task force members. I feel like we should be music playing, right? Now let's meet our guests. Each comes from a specific background that makes them valuable to this work. Over the past 2 weeks, I've enjoyed speaking with each of you individually about the work ahead of us. Thank you very much for the commitment you're making to your community and your region. As I introduce each of you, please, if it says stand up, but just like leave, that's probably okay. Just wave so that you can be identified. Now we switch to where I say, okay, first up we have Timothy Barr, Managing Director of Water Wastewater at Maryland Environmental Service. Then we have Lauren Buckler, Deputy Director of the Baltimore County Department of Public Works and Transportation. We will be joined by Lester Davis, Vice President and Chief of Staff of CareFirst Blue Cross Blue Shield, and also a former Deputy Chief of Staff to Baltimore City Mayor Jack Young. He is en route. Joseph Cavetta is Director of the Howard County Department of Public Works and former Chief of Baltimore's Water and Wastewater Bureau in the Department of Public Works. We have Senator Cory McRae, Deputy Majority Whip of the Maryland Senate. We have Jessica Medicus, Environmental Manager at Bay Associates Environmental Incorporated. We also have Jason Mitchell, former Director of the Baltimore City Department of Public Works and former Assistant City Administrator for Oakland. Patrick Moran is a member of the task force. He's president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Council 3. He was unable to join us tonight, so he will be represented by Stuart Katzenberg. Keisha Powell is the General Manager and CEO of the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission and former DC Water Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President. And I believe she's joining us remotely. She's online. As is Carla Reed, former General Manager of WSFC Water and former Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Economic Development and Public Infrastructure at Prince George's County Government. And then we have Delegate Dana Stein, Vice Chair of the Environmental and Transportation Committee in the Maryland House of Delegates, and Dr. Robert Summers, former Maryland Secretary of the Environment. And that's our task force. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be putting in a lot of work in a relatively short period of time, and I want to again take this opportunity to thank all of these people for taking the time out of their lives to add this to their ordinary duties and really help all of us in the region by coming up with a better governance system for our water, wastewater, and stormwater system. Let's see, I think that's it. So we're ready to get to work. Brian, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Henry. My name is Brian Shell, and I'm with WSP. We're the consultants with task force. And it's my real pleasure to be here and to kick us off with the first consulting presentation for the work that we're doing. And I will follow with that chair to make sure that the zone is fired. So excuse me for that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about WSB. Obviously, you're coming to this meeting and we're really happy to be opportunity to support the task force as a whole in their important charge here. We have about 70,000 employees around the world, and 250 of us work from our office at 1 East Pratt Street downtown where I work. And we have put together a broad team who will be hearing from today. I have a number of my colleagues who will introduce themselves later. And our team includes several specialized subcontractors who are doing this work with us. And I'll tell you a little bit about them. The first one of those sub-consultants is our financial expertise firm, that's FG Solutions. They're a minority woman-owned business, and we have the pleasure to work with them on a number of projects, and you'll be hearing from them, especially in the third and fourth meetings that the chair talked about when we get to the conclusions about the fiscal analysis. We have Kumasi Vines, who will introduce himself in a bit, and he's the president of Vines Engineering. They're a minority-owned business based in Baltimore City, and we're very happy that they're part of our team. We also have Clean Energy Capital, and they're a registered municipal advisor, which means that they can provide important advice related to debt and other liabilities that are important for the work that the task force is going to have to do in thinking about the money impacts of what's before them. So we're very happy that we were able to put this team together. And I'm happy, as someone who's lived in Baltimore City for 15 years, that I have the opportunity to be the project manager and lead the work that we're doing to support the task force. It's personally very satisfying and important that we reach a good conclusion for this and set up future generations with a reasonable and sustainable water governance structure. I've worked extensively in water and wastewater for my career for some of the utilities that are represented here at the table, and Baltimore City to Baltimore County and WSSC and others. And I have the pleasure now for the company to lead our national water advisory services group. So we have consultants around the country who are focused on solving project delivery issues, solving management consulting type challenges, and working to establish new regulatory and governance frameworks. And I'm excited that I have the opportunity to connect those national best practices that we've learned from projects around the country so that we can solve the water governance here for the Greater Baltimore region. And my responsibility will be to support this task force to make sure that they have the information, the reports that they need, the resources that they need, and that they're connected to all of those resources that we have within WSP as we're doing that support. I'd like to, at this time, let some of my colleagues introduce themselves and give our.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kumasi Vines, representing Vines Engineering. That's my picture up there. I'm a former employee of the City of Baltimore. I'm in DPW. I was in Bureau's office for a while, as well as I've served as chief of the Office of Boards and Commissions. So what I bring into this task force is just my understanding of how the Bureau operates, as well as just the extensive history I have with the City of Baltimore and some of the ins and outs. And I'm very happy to be a part of this project.
I'm Bill Frankenfield. I've been with, my career in Baltimore has been primarily with Baltimore County as Chief of Bureau of Utilities, and went through the period of consent decree and implementing it, and a lot of challenges there, and retired and then went to work for WSP. So then I worked for Baltimore City in the basically implementing asset management programs for the city related to water and wastewater, underground infrastructure. And that's,
hello everyone, I'm Paula Fashigan. So I have about, I've been working in the water and environment for about 23 years. Water environment, water infrastructure, and water resources. I was an employee of WSSC. I'm right now with WSP, here with WSP today. More recently, I have been working on county projects on the asset management side and infrastructure asset management. water, wastewater, storm drain networks. Also, in the past, worked on and this is probably precursor to asset management for multiple city integrated planning framework. Right now, on this task, I am helping with existing conditions, where the asset, what the state of the asset is and where we are. And that's what I'll be talking about a little bit later on.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is David Williams. I am with WSP Advisory. I have split my career between the private and the public sector, and the expertise that I really bring to this project is reviewing asset management programs, as well as supporting some of the organizational change management that often kind of comes along with that process. So, excited to be on this project.
Great. Thanks for allowing us to introduce some of the members of the team who've been working on this project task. So as we kind of get started about the presentation, as the chair explained, the charge of this task force, originates in the House bill. And we thought maybe it was useful in starting out here to kind of back up a little bit and explain why we're here and how we got to this point. And what the kind of specific charge is for the task force in that bill, which is available online, and it's pretty brief, and it probably worth if you'll continue to be engaged with this process to use that, because that'll be the framework by which this task force does their work and tells them what their charge is, and we'll get into that in a little bit of detail here. So for some history, there was a business process review done starting in about 2019 by a company called Nugent, and there is a report which is available online. I'll talk a little more about it later. That summarizes for both Baltimore City and Baltimore County what are the pinch points, what is the existing conditions, and we'll summarize some of the findings from that as part of our discussion here today. The task force is also required, as part of this, to coordinate with the Maryland Department of the Environment and the Maryland Environmental Service. So we had MVP and MES participating in this meeting, Art, through Mr. Barr's presence on the task force. So that is part of this work to help ensure that at the state level there is involvement and they are part of this process that the task force is carrying out. The conclusion that we are working towards our findings and a recommended governance model by the end of January. That's the conclusion of the work that this task force has before it. And that report will go up to the mayor, the county executive, the governor, and the legislature by the end of January. So our role in supporting this task force is to perform analysis that supports their decision making as they reach and review alternative governance models, consider the fiscal implications of those models, and then arrive at a recommended model that will be the new model for the utilities in this area. I guess maybe we'll pause here for a moment to see if there's any task force members or the chair, if there's anything you'd like to add about the issue.
Nope, that was great.
We're going by.
Yeah, I will take a moment to say that Keith Powell, who I had previously announced was being virtual, is here in IRL. And we've also been now joined by Sam Sid from Baltimore County, who I mentioned earlier. Still hoping that Lester Davis makes it through DC traffic.
I'm going to turn things over to Xavier, who's going to step us through some of the criteria that the task force went over.
Thanks, Brent. When it comes to the governance models, really what that refers to is the organizational structure, right, that drives how services are delivered. We're looking at that in a number of ways, but primarily as it relates to just basic responsibility, roles and responsibility, performance metrics, and policies and procedures related to the overall operation of water and wastewater enterprises as they're jointly managed and shared between the city and the county. So that work really has a couple key target areas, and those are listed here. So it's management, its operations. I'll jump down to building and collections, planning, capital improvements, and rate stability for customers. So those are, I would say, the primary target areas of this work. And then to some degree, secondarily, employee recruitment, retention and training, and emergency management. But as you can see, with respect to those going into identifying some alternative governance models, a lot of that being guided by looking at how other utilities function, that these are some of the key areas that we're really focused on in collaboration with the task force. So.
Actually, David, can I jump in real quick? Just to say, I realized just now, looking at that list, that it ends with rate stability for customers, but there probably should also be something about rate sufficiency for operations. Because I did have a couple of conversations in which it was pointed out to me that as important as it is that water and sewer rates remain, let's call it projectable for the customers, we also have to make sure that the system is charging enough to actually take care of itself. Because if we're not charging enough to properly maintain operations, that's its own potential issue. So just wanted to take this opportunity to convey that.
Thank you.
Okay, so kind of sticking with this, somewhat of a summary of the objectives of the task force. Part of this work involves looking, as has been said already, at how other water and wastewater utilities of similar size and characteristics are generally structured. Speaking to some of the organizational functions, if you will, that really breaks down in terms of governance, financing, capital planning, capacity expansion and planning around that, and core decision-making processes, thinking about some of the policies and procedures that guide the coordination between the city and the county, and ongoing operations and maintenance. So, your methods and your funding are in place to preserve the useful life of the assets. Bridging on what Chair just said there about the importance of a financial picture which is sustainable. So all of these kind of play into how we're, if you will, benchmarking based on some of the best practices that we're identifying with other utilities that bear resemblance to some of the governance models that we're looking at. With respect to the coordination between the city and the county, task forces is yes focused on that, but there's also a tremendous amount of effort going into assessing the financial outlook of the water and wastewater enterprises based on how those would change. As has been already kind of being emphasized, the core of a lot of this work is identifying an alternative governance structure. And so improvements to the existing structure will inevitably have an impact on the overall financial picture, right? So we have experts in utility budgeting, financing, and rates who will be assessing impacts to some of these key areas. System transitions, asset leases, staffing and pension liabilities, and then just generally kind of jurisdiction costs. So that's another side of the coin, if you will. And I'll pass it back to Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Xavier. And just to give some additional kind of context around these prior 3 slides, these are the criteria that are laid out in the bill for the task force to consider as they're doing their work. So we really wanted to make sure that, as all of us, including the public who are participating in this, are joining us on this process, we understand if we're grading these papers, we need to know what the rubric is, right, before we give them a grade. And the rubric are these criteria that are in the bill. And so our ultimate report that comes out of this will be structured around these criteria so that everyone is up to speed and comfortable that we have assessed using what is prescribed in the bill as the criteria to help us arrive at the new model for governance and water in the region that will be decided by this task force. So that's very much the building blocks of the work that this task force is going to have to do. And so we want to make sure that everyone understands that and that's clear before we get into much more. So as I mentioned before, there has been some prior work that has gotten us to the point that we're at now. Besides the bill, there's the new gen report, the business process review that was completed previously. This report is available online, using the chair's advice before, probably, you will make sure that the link is on the task force homepage. It is already on the city website. If you Google water business process review Baltimore, it will pop up. It's a lengthy report. It's 350 pages. It does take some time to get through it. There are a few pieces to that report that I think can help inform you as an engaged citizen as you're reading through it. So first off, where I started when I was asked to read it the first time was the executive summary, which was only 12 pages. And I could get through that pretty easily. But it gives you a really good idea of the challenges that Baltimore City DPW and Baltimore County DPW&T have faced as it relates to water and wastewater. It gives some ideas for future consideration that form the basis of what we are facilitating with this task force. There's also, right up front near the table of contents, there's a list of exhibits. And I kind of found it, the VR shared this advice with me, to kind of go through and look at the pictures first. And there are some really interesting graphs and figures in there. You kind of find yourself going through that list of figures and then saying, oh, I do want to read the section around this, if you don't have the time to get through the whole 350 pages. But that gives all of us a really good framework and as-is conditions for both of the utilities. And so we suggest that anybody who's actively engaged in this process over the next few months spend some time with that to get up to speed. I will step through a very high-level conclusion of some of the findings from that report. The executive summary is the Cliff Notes version. This is like only reading the back of the Cliff Notes book, but it's high level, and I've kind of split these into three different categories. So operational, organizational, and governance. And so we'll kind of step through those. And I think this is a good time where we can talk amongst the task force members with their expert knowledge about utilities and where they maybe have seen some of these pinch points pop up in their work that surround these. The first aspect that we'll talk about, and you see on the slide behind me, are issues surrounding operations. So in running a utility, obviously we know right now we're talking a bit about the physical assets that comprise these two utilities. But Baltimore City and Baltimore County, being two different utilities, obviously are limited in their ability to conduct joint planning exercises. The city and county work together, they do attempt to do that as best they can, but at the end of the day, it's two separate utilities. It limits their ability to plan on the capital side, to make improvements, or to make adjustments to operations that are meaningful for both of them, because they're separate right now. In the upper right, one thing that is difficult for them to work on together are coordinating as it relates to safety issues and that type of oversight. Obviously, there are regulatory requirements as it relates to OSHA and other requirements that have to trace back to the employer of an employee. But by virtue of this interconnected system, you have employees who are working together, in some cases on site. And so that was a pinch point that was noted in the new gen report. Another kind of moving around the clockwise direction, there have been a large backlog of work orders and issues with metering and customer service. There were some changes that were made following the new gen report and the Inspector General report, adjust how those processes work, and to combine ticketing systems. And I don't know if anybody on the task force wanted to speak about any of these operational issues before we move on.
Doesn't look like it. Are we?
Sorry, I mean, I would just say that I think a lot of what's obviously in this report is accurate. I think so there's other questions regarding obviously staffing levels and manpower to carry it out, and the inability to carry out the work, and then furthermore, the contracting out of what was city bargaining unit work, outside contractors and their staff. coming in behind in.
The new Gen report also then focused on some of the organizational pinch points, and they conducted a review comparing utilities here to other utilities around the country, and found that there was higher than average vacancy rate for employees. And that has kind of created a ripple effect, as you see again, moving clockwise through this graphic, meaning changes in senior leadership were occurring, and high turnover rates in certain key positions that affects how the utilities run. They did also do a salary comparison, and they did see that in general, employees of these utilities are making some sacrifice compared to how they might be compensated if they're working at other area utilities or if they're in the private sector, for instance. And then as well, there was a note that there was not really a succession planning effort. So with high turnover, you can kind of see how these effects can snowball, that there was not really a succession planning set up to figure out when someone leaves a key position, have we cross-trained, have we made sure that someone is able to step into that. And then when you compound that with conditions making it more likely for them to leave, more of them leaving, then that happens more, and it kind of goes from there. Those are some of the organizational observations in the new Gen. We'll talk as well about the last section of the findings from new Gen, which were surrounding broadly classified as governance. And so, what is governance, right? It's the governance task force. So how did these entities interact? How do they get their work done? Is at its essence, I think, the focus of governance. And in general, it was difficult, especially to resolve disputes related to billing issues. And again, we talked a little bit about how some of the ticketing process was streamlined to make that more efficient and work better for customers, understanding that the city is doing their water billing as one of the findings and improvements made as a result of the new general program that was completed in 2021. In general, the business process review team felt that there was a lack of a culture of continuous improvement or accountability at that time that they saw. And again, the strategic planning challenges that came up previously were also cited as part of the governance pinch points, and in general, making sure that communications can happen effectively across the jurisdictional boundaries, so two separate utilities can run together. And then finally, looking at oversight processes to make sure that what they're doing is customer-centric. So these findings, came out in 2021 as part of the new Gen report. And as we talked, there were a number of adjustments that were made following that report. But one of the pieces that was spurred basically from that process ultimately led to us all being here today. Right? So that is in part how we have gone into this part of the process of having this task force put together to solve some of these challenges. So although it can be disappointing or difficult to hear about the problems that might exist in an organization, understanding where the problems are, with the benefit, and we hope to hear tonight from all of you, the public, about other observations that you might have about pinch points or questions that you have about this process to inform the work of the task force so that they're solving the right problems. That's what's important to us. The next part of what we're going to cover this morning, or this evening, is...
I hope you're not looking ahead to how long we're going to resolve this evening.
Are looking at some of the existing agreements that govern the interaction between the utilities. But before I go there, I will pause to see if there's any other task force discussion here before we head into the agreement.
We are also joined by Lester Davis, who was previously introduced. So does anybody have any questions they want to raise on the new Gen report or points of discussion that they'd like to raise? If not, we will move on to the
This next graphic is not intended to be something that and there'll be a quiz on it at the end of the night, asking you what the 16th agreement was on the timeline and what year it was finalized. But when we put this up, just as we're kind of starting this discussion around the agreements that govern the interaction that we have between the city and the county, to say quite simply, it's complicated. And the history is long in these agreements, and part of our work is to make sure that we understand these agreements and we understand what the implications of them are, so that going forward, it's digestible and explained in the report in a way that is understood well. And as we move towards whatever the future solution may be, whatever the future model may look like, significant changes in any sense to how these utilities interact will require adjustments to the agreements that are currently used. And some of the major ones, are from 1972 and 1974. So they do have some age on them. And many of you are probably familiar with what the city and the county were like in 1972 and 1974. And know that now today, the jurisdictions are different places than they were then. We'll go into some details about that. But part of our work and part of what you'll see in the report when it's made available as part of the final processes are an understanding of the agreements that exist that govern these interactions, so that we can know where we need to make improvements going forward for this. I'm going to turn back to Xavier to step us through some of the details of these agreements.
Thanks, Brian. Something that's a little more legible. So in terms of the population history, I think that the slide speaks for itself in some ways as well. The story here really is not just that the Baltimore region is thriving in terms of population growth, but a substantial share of that growth is happening in the wider county. So this is after all the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Task Force. In fact, thinking about the importance of population, that was a key driver for the development of the 72 and 74 agreements. So in some ways, kind of, here we are again, I guess, in looking at population as a way to kind of explain why some of the challenges are. So back in 1929, a single district that includes county and the city was set up to be responsible for the drinking water supply, wastewater, and stormwater management. The legislation required Baltimore City to extend the water supply lines throughout that district. And originally this was under the jurisdiction of county commissioners of Baltimore County. And those are some snippets there just from the actual agreement. Essentially, yeah, that was in some ways the start of that timeline that Brian showed earlier. So the 1972 water agreement, marks the city and the county coming together to agree on the calculation and payment for the expenses that are, that were incurred on an annual basis by both enterprises. It also set up it formalized the requirements, related to new and existing facilities, drinking water pipelines, O&M costs, operations and maintenance costs, paid for by the county, and metered water billing for the water customers. So the annual water settlement, which is based on direct and indirect costs for operations, is completed based on the cost allocation principles from this agreement. So there's a couple of different methods, which are, that cost allocation methodology is based on, and I won't get into the weeds on those. I think they're on the next slide, but it's flow distribution method, incremental volume method, system volumetric method, and zonal method. So these are, again, this is all kind of a methodology that has a long history, as we've already established. Necessarily part of the work this task force has to kind of grapple with and understand, do these still make sense? And lastly, this agreement also set up the Water Analyzer Office, which was, managing capacity planning. I think that's come up a couple of times already as an important part of this work, and that office has evolved over the years, but it still exists in its majority on the county side presently. I'll pause before moving on to.
I think you might be in a different order than what we have in our hard copy. Or maybe you just went faster than I thought. Did you Can you go back to the slide for 1972 water agreement highlights that starts keep provisions continued? Okay.
Yeah, apologies, Chair Henry. I think I did move a little bit quicker than the screen might have shown. So I stopped at the last slide
We were gonna go
on the
into sewer.
1972 water agreement.
We just talked about the water agreement.
Right.
That we were gonna go into sewer.
You know, I had a question about this slide. Establish Baltimore County's obligation to pay its proportionate share of all expenses resulting from the operation, maintenance, administration of the Baltimore water system. So is this agreement still in place?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so this agreement has altered the amount of money that Baltimore County pays as the population ratio between the city and the county has changed in the ensuing decade.
It's a factor, population, it's not the only.
Okay, that's fair, that, I'm just, actually, then it might be a good idea to take a minute and talk about how is proportionate share of all expenses calculated.
That may be one that we would want to table as a next meeting.
Oh,
This is a useful for us to have.
that's not part of agreements and that were existing agreements. Or, okay, we'll put that in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you, David.
Because I think it would be useful for us to maybe in the next meeting come back to that and have a graphic with sort of how that model works and see how changes impact that, impact a simulation type way. I think that might maybe be a useful way for the public to.
So this is a great example of how it's going to be later on during public comment. If anybody chooses to ask a question that we're not prepared to answer fully in terms of giving the nuance and being able to explain it in the most succinct and accurate way. So they're going to take my question and they're going to come back at the next meeting with me. Lester.
Mr. Chair, so to add on to what the chair was saying for the next meeting, I guess for me, I'm wondering to that point, if the most recent agreement has the framework to establish it, how is that kept track or has it? And if you were, how would that end? Like if we were keeping honest to what this should have been and the levels were adjusted in the way they should have, how would that adjust where we are now in terms of the problem we find ourselves facing? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Looking at how it maybe it has been or should be trued up. Right.
Or
If we're tailoring that as part of this.
A sense of truth on if it has, right? So if it hasn't, then why not? And then if we had, would that have impacted kind of where we find ourselves?
So the answers to this will be part of your presentation at the next meeting.
That'd be part of the update.
Stuart, then Jason.
List of other agreements, there's other agreements for Hartford, Anne Arundel, and Howard counties. I would say the same question is true. Is it all trued up? Are we up to date, or they missed payments, or were we undercharging in the course of that history?
I was gonna ask that same question, but I just would like to add the data, what their rate history was over the last 20-25 years since 72. So you can see if those rates were keeping up with the Baltimore City rates as well.
Yeah, I was meeting with our fiscal team that's working to prepare the materials for meetings 3 and 4 yesterday, actually. And we have a kind of a model that's been put together, looking at that, those base charges and the status quo and comparing them. So that's definitely something that we, okay.
So do I understand you to say that at the next meeting, you're gonna talk about basically how the agency currently implements the agreement with regard to recovering
Yeah,
through this agreement? So basically the process of the billing, the true up, the cost share for projects, operation and maintenance, all of that together.
So the focus of next meeting, and we can a little bit of a preview of this at the end, is around governance models in general, and we imagine the outcome being selecting what models, will be passed forward for further study by the task force. But as part of this inquiry, as it relates to the content of this meeting, we are going to follow up with some more information about how that mechanism works in the water agreement model, maybe something a little more dynamic than just excerpts from the agreements. And I say that to explain that the focus of the third and fourth meetings are the fiscal analysis, where we'll be looking at the base case and all of that in more detail as well. But as a follow-up to meeting one, we will do that in meeting two, but there will be the fiscal material is largely going to be covered in meetings 3 and 4.
It might be worthwhile, and first of all, well, actually, this is a good time to take the temperature of the task force. In situations like this, where people, either ourselves, members of the task force, or the public, ask questions about something that we're going to talk about in the future. And are we okay with waiting until we get to that meeting to get the question answered? Or would we like the question answered at the next meeting, just so that we can get the information as soon as possible in terms of availability? Does anybody have a strong preference?
I mean, I think, if you have access to it, right, like, so there are gonna be times where there's something, a question is asked that's gonna be germane to a topic that may come up later, or you may have the answer. I would say, if we got information, if you're asking for information, and you can get the perspective, I think it's always good to get the perspective, and if we need to come back to it, to reference it, because it's gonna be important to a future topic, we can do it twice, right? I don't see any reason why we can't do that. And there may be times when you gotta get more data, or you gotta dig in, but you may be able to.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say that it depends. I mean, if there's going to be a milestone where we're making a decision, or voting for a particular item, and whatever information we're seeking is not for until later, let's go into that process.
You'll see we've been fairly intentional with, for the benefit of the public, giving some preview of what we will cover in the next meeting, because I don't know, sometimes I've attended public meetings and there have been 4 or 5 or however many different options, and it's just been, I could find out the same information in each meeting and just pick the one that's closest to where I live and with preference in Greektown. But
Well, I think that, from what I have heard, and possibly more importantly, what I haven't heard, in terms of objection, is since we're not going to need to make the introductory remarks at each meeting, I think it would be best if we take the first 15 minutes of each future meeting to answer questions from the previous meeting that we didn't have available that works.
Not meaning to disrupt the flow of how you envision presenting this, but it would be helpful to fully understand the as-is before delving into the what could be or what should be. And I think a huge part of the as-is is the mechanisms by which costs are recovered under the existing agreements, because there could be a potential need to change the language in existing agreements to facilitate a to-be process. So having a full understanding of the as-is, and I don't know if that changes how you intended to present or lay out the information, but it's really important to understand that as-is, and a huge part of it is the cost share agreements and the mechanism for operation, maintenance, and capital cost recovery.
So going forward in future meetings, we'll start each meeting with answering the questions from the previous meetings. And then you can go into the subject area presentation that was already pre-scheduled.
I think that serves, it's an important recap too, if a member of the public, for instance, they have not been able to attend the previous meeting. In hearing this, then they're also getting somewhat of a recap of what had been covered naturally.
While we're talking about the rate structure, issue, right, when you're analyzing that, can you make sure unbilled water is part of that?
Mhm.
And how that works between the jurisdictions, because that's gonna be an important factor in those percentages and who's paying what.
Okay, back to April.
I think so. I'll try to the pace here. Or maybe not so, because I think I lost the folks last time. But so switching gears to 74 sewer agreement, right? The last one was focused on there's the water agreement, so drinking water. That was 1972, and it was 1974. Regional wastewater collection, so that's treatment, that's conveyance, that's pumping. This agreement established a cost allocation methodology as well for costs for repairs to this system, annual sewerage charges between the city and the county, capital cost share for facilities that are
Stay on him for this whole
and
thing.
again, those jurisdictional flows.
Don't show
so
him.
Determining a methodology for annual operating
Fixing the
costs,
lights
how those are borne between the two entities. So it also established certain capacity planning measures as well. And just as with the last one, until the city and county really replace it, this agreement remains in place. So I kind of went through my talking points for this agreement, and there's I believe 2 or 3 slides dedicated to this one, so we can just move through those as well.
Yeah, and we'll make, obviously, when we're talking about that dynamic model that we'll share in the next meeting before we get to the discussion about the different government models, we will address that for both the water and the wastewater stuff. Just to be clear. So the order of this meant that we started with the legal documents and the agreements, and assuming we haven't lost anyone's interest as a result of that, we're going to have a little more visual exploration now as we talk about what are some of the physical assets. So when we go home and we turn on our tap and we drink clean, good tasting water, how do they get to my house? And then when I'm done with it, where does it go? So I'm going to turn things over to my other colleagues, and we'll start out on Kumasi and Bola and Bill to kind of step us through some of these graphics. Now, what we've done here, we've kind of realized in doing this, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, about the surrounding counties as well, the wholesale customers, that there was not really one graphic or one way to put everything on one page that showed the scope of what is before this task force. So we went down the avenue of collecting a lot of data around this, and we put it together, and it's actually resulted in a graphic that seems probably pretty complicated. So what we did after we got it all onto one like we thought we wanted, is we split it into 2 different graphics for water and wastewater. And I'll let my colleagues take over from here.
Okay, so what we have here is, hopefully showing an appreciation of how much of the infrastructure it takes when you turn your tap on, water comes out, drains with no issues. Right now, we have on this map showing right here, we have a schematic of the the skeletal system of conveying water, raw water, through the treatment process, pumping process, into homes and businesses, and that water going down the sewer pipes and getting returned back to the receiving streams, mostly cleaner than when it was actually extracted in the first place. So, like Brian had mentioned, this graphic here kind of just shows the overall whole system. Talking about the drinking water first, this focuses on the assets, the schematic of the asset, conveyance, in the service area. You can see the abstraction of surface water from the reservoirs, oil operating on the reservoirs, And we also have a direct abstraction actually from the Susquehanna River. This raw water to 3 water treatment plants, which serve to treat the water and send clean water to Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Howard County, as part of all those agreements that earlier, and also to Baltimore City. Untreated water, well, raw water actually is conveyed to Howard County and Westminster and Hartford County to perform their water treatment. This is what is shown here is really the main conveyance system, but to actually get to the homes, there's a whole amount of distribution assets that are in place to distribute this water to your homes and businesses. So we have about 3,700 miles of pipeline across the system that achieve that. Just stay there. 2,100 of those in Baltimore County. It's better to see him than to see. You have about 405 million gallons of water treated daily to serve customers. So in many cases, this water has to be pumped using about 19 pump stations and stored in 24 tanks, storage tanks.
Well, before you continue, I do have a question. Just for accuracy, we can just double check on the Anne Arundel portion. Right now, we have it represents a flow to the AA County, which I don't think exists.
Yeah, so there's a note on a larger version of this map that doesn't fit on the slide that actually says exactly what you just said, but because the agreement is in place, it's shown, but we are aware that Anne Arundel County is not doing that, but because the focus of this meeting was on the agreement and the organizational structure, we felt that where there were agreements, including to only take water in emergency scenarios, we should still reflect that as part of this, but.
So moving on, are we done with
Go back to that guy.
Any questions on drinking water? So this is for the wastewater infrastructure here. So once we consume water, water goes through wastewater infrastructure. It goes through your sewer pipes, and it's pumped in many cases too, and it's taken to 2 wastewater treatment plants. The plants are in we have the Pasco plant and the Back River treatment plant. They're responsible for treating a total of 250 million gallons a day of water. And in all days, you can see the infrastructure that takes the wastewater to the plant. In terms of pipeline infrastructure, it's about 3,500 miles of sewer, with 1,400 of them being in Baltimore City and 2,100 in the county. In terms of the value of that infrastructure, the county alone, you're talking about $4 or $5 billion of infrastructure, of just pipeline infrastructure. So in many instances, like I mentioned, you have the pumping needs to occur to be able to move water to higher ground and wastewater to higher ground, and that's achieved using 9 pump stations in the city and over 120 pump stations. So I think this kind of gives you a picture of the infrastructure and the assets that we have to supply drinking water and also convey wastewater, treat it and return it to the streams. Like I said, in most cases, cleaner than it was when it was abstracted from the raw water sources. So, and with that, further the operations, I'll hand over to Massey.
So I'm going to speak briefly on the city structure for the city of Baltimore. I'm just going to try to use a little bit of So as you can see, at the top of this organizational structure, there's a director, and in the blue, the Asian reporting structure here as leadership of the organization. So just briefly, customer service and support division, Bureau of Solid Waste, Chief of Administration, Bureau of Water and Wastewater, and Equity Coordinator. And on the bottom right, we're going to go a little deeper into the structure of the Bureau of Water and Wastewater. So this, and many people in the room, and especially on the task force, can attest that a lot of this has changed. There's been many iterations of this over the years, decades. But essentially it's the Bureau head, and then the operational leads for the Office of Asset Management, Office of Engineering and Construction, Administration, Utility Maintenance Division, Water Facilities Division, and Wastewater Facilities Division, reporting up to the Bureau head, and additional functions, of course, in each of those departments, reporting up to the leadership of those offices and boards. So again, there's been a lot of iterations of this over the years, but this is just a snapshot of 1979 compared to current organizational structure. So as you can see on the left side, Director of Public Works, Bureau reporting up to the Director, and then those essential functions reporting up to the Bureau head on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is a snapshot of the current organizational structure. Some of the offices' names have changed, but just pointing out that the Bureau head, of course, still reports to the Director of Public Works, but the Customer Service and Support Division currently reports directly to the Director.
Moving to the Baltimore County organization, this is the Department of Public Works Director at the top. On the left side is the Metropolitan Finance part of the organization that's in the director's office, and that's of course for Resolve, Bureau of Highways, then Traffic Engineering, and Engineering and Construction, and Solid Waste, and the last Bureau is the Bureau of Utilities, and we'll go into more detail on the next slide. There's basically 4 operating divisions in this bureau. The construction division is the one that has the most direct involvement with Baltimore City's maintenance operations. It's a coordinated effort to repair water main breaks, so that the city basically calls Baltimore County or the Bureau of Utilities, and they determine what time they will go out to dig up one of these water main breaks. And then the county then typically would provide a dump truck to put the spoil material in, or to collect it so it doesn't, there's no problem putting it on the ground. After the repair is made and after the Bureau of Utilities has pretty much satisfied that the leak is completely resolved, then it's the county's responsibility to do the backfill and then do the final paving. That's where the Bureau of Highways comes along. Final paving. That construction division does a lot more than just water main breaks. There's a lot of sewer repair work, and storm drain inlet repair work. The next division is pipeline maintenance. We have a question from the task force.
Go back to why. Let's stay on the graphic for a minute.
I just have a quick question. Does the construction division, where's it disposal when you do?
No, we can't get them.
Mostly
Just stand
repair.
there.
Mostly repairs.
Okay.
I'm gonna jump in and clarify a couple of those things, because I think some of it got a little mixed up there. So for water main breaks, they are Baltimore City's responsibility. This is something that comes up when a daily basis. For all of us, most of us at this table. So they're Baltimore City's responsibility. The calls go into Baltimore City. If you call Baltimore County, we transfer you to Baltimore City 311. Baltimore City determines if it's going to be an in-house repair or outsourced repair.
And that's even if it's a break in county.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. Even if it breaks right outside this building right now, we have to call City 311, which when you dial it in the county, you get County 311. They have to transfer you to City 311, which is very confusing for residents. Once you get to City 311, they turn it over to City Utilities, who determines if it's in-house or outsourced. If it's outsourced, the contractor does all the paving, all the stuff that Bill was mentioning. The county doesn't do anything at all. If it's done in-house by city workforce, then there's an agreement that the county, through our DPWT, goes out with a dump truck, hauls any soil off, and we do paving. It's very complicated. It's very confusing for residents that there's these two different processes and when which one is taking place.
So how do you handle new construction? New construction, in the county.
New construction for water, that's my Baltimore accent.
They're going counties, so I'm just curious. Is it handled?
New construction is by the county in the county. So if we were gonna build a whole new water main down Liberty Road, Baltimore County, in Baltimore County, doing the work, outsourced typically.
So
If it's something small, we would do it in-house through that construction unit.
So with this construction group handle that?
Unless it's something small, this construction group would handle it. If it's something large, like we're doing on Liberty Road or something, it would be outsourced through our engineering group.
Any other questions?
Yeah, we have at least two more questions.
I just want to make sure I heard you right, in reference to the new construction. So is this done in concert with Baltimore City? Because if they have to maintain it, they want to make sure that it's done right. I just want to get an understanding as you're talking that through.
Great point. Yes, it's done in conjunction with the city. So we do have regular meetings with them about these projects. We have a capital plan about what we're doing. We are coordinated on what our projects, because we do need to connect into that. If it's just a replacement, same size, we still would tell them about it, but there's much less coordination than if we were putting in something new, larger, bigger.
Besides the buried infrastructure, tanks, pumping stations that are in the county, those are also capital projects that the county undertakes. Correct? If they benefit county residents only.
Yes.
So it's another layer of complication in terms of the relationship.
Yeah, I'll just add to that on the pipeline, it has to be 16 inches and below for the county to replace those.
Thanks. This is all very interesting, and I'm wondering, is it written down somewhere? Is this in your governance agreements? It seems to me that this coordination is just critical. I mean, cost obviously has to be coordinated, but for the water consumer, it's coordination of operations, planning, construction. Where does that fit into these governance agreements?
Those are great questions, and that's why we're all sitting here, because we're gonna figure out a better path forward. Some of it is in these old agreements, like what the team just showed you, but a lot of it is.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of it has kind of evolved in the absence of a new agreement. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, as someone who's been working in government for a long time, I frequently find that this is a living example of what they say when they say institutional memory. Is there are people who work for government who have dealt with these problems for long enough that they've stopped having to go look up the answer and they just know them. The problem is if they leave, then sometimes nobody who's still there does know this by heart. And in some especially disturbing examples, doesn't even know where to look to find the answers. So you put your finger on how crucial it is to make sure that we have all of these things well documented. And I'm sure that that will be a part of our eventual recommendation, is maybe carving the final decision into the sides of the wall somewhere so that anybody can go look at it. I did want to ask, and I'm not sure if this is something where it was just deliberately omitted because it wasn't either water or wastewater, but I was surprised that I thought I'd seen these versions of these org charts with stormwater on them. And I am not. Is there not a separate breakout for stormwater in the city, such that it's,
So if we're looking at the city, within the Office of Engineering and Construction, that first box, actually this is page 32, environmental, that's where the stormwater capital projects are implemented. So the stormwater lives in the environmental.
stormwater?
Keeping track of the questions that I had, and one of the questions was, is stormwater in the scope of this assessment?
I know I was expecting
Okay.
that would be the case. It's too tied in to the wastewater to not address it.
Okay, thank you.
And I mean that both physically and in a more conceptual fashion. That if we're going to bother to figure out how to deal with our water and wastewater systems in a better way, to just leave stormwater, try to break it off of water and wastewater, it seems like that would actually just be creating more problems. So I guess I will say, I had been just taking it for granted that stormwater would come along with water and wastewater. So,
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, I sort of agree with you that stormwater sort of complements issues, especially water and wastewater. But are there joint city-county agreements on stormwater management, or are those primarily between each jurisdiction and
actually, that was part of what encouraged me to believe we should, is that there doesn't seem to be an existing institutionalized method of cooperation between the subdivisions on stormwater. And okay, well, there's a couple jokes I can make about things running downhill. But what I'll say very seriously is that stormwater issues in Baltimore County inevitably become stormwater issues in Baltimore City. So I would think that it would make a lot of sense to address stormwater regionally if we're going to address water and wastewater regionally. It seems like low-hanging fruit in that regard. Like, if we're going to bother to figure out how best to deal with water and wastewater, let's make sure stormwater's in there at the same time.
Sure.
I don't disagree, but if we're looking at potentially WSSC as a model, if Montgomery County and East Georgia has handled their own stormwater maintenance and capital projects, so that's something to consider, because we do not have that agreement between the city.
Well, that's the beauty of the task force. We can look at models, but that doesn't mean we have to take all of one. We can take what works at one, we can find something from another, and we can even come up with something good that works for us because it turns out nobody else is quite like us. And boy, that's probably happening.
Hence why I was asking the question, because if there are not the same level of cooperative agreement for stormwater as water and wastewater. And so in terms of looking at governance models, if that is the direction that is desired, then we would need to understand that full scope, and then also understand how stormwater is managed in each of the jurisdictions as well.
Is that not already on WSP's plate to look at stormwater management?
Yeah, I mean, it is part of, what we're doing with these utilities, and I think as, we'll talk a little bit as a preview of what we are looking at with the different governance models, but part of doing that can be, as Kyle suggested, asking, alongside of that, and how does that entity handle stormwater? And then we'll know, is it a model like WSSC where it's not part and parcel to that utility's scope, but it's, we'll also have other utilities where stormwater is part of those. And so as we look at the case studies in the next meeting, that'll be part of what we look at as well. Special emphasis to make sure we include ones that do handle stormwater.
Well, then maybe one of the things we should add to the agenda for the next meeting is a clarification for the task force. Are we going to expect to integrate stormwater management into whatever we're trying to recommend, such that you make a point of not just looking for models, but looking for how any of the models you might be sharing with us can be adapted to address that issue, even if the model currently doesn't.
Right.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll now talk a little bit about what the next steps are. So the direction that we had for this meeting was to review the existing agreements and to review the city and county organizational structures. And again, that's why this meeting was set up as a building block to make sure that we all understand that we have existing issues and we know that there are some follow-ups that we need to do as we move into the next meetings. What has been said and in the business process review was that the outcome of that report are findings and observations that create a gap between the current city-county approach and what we call world-class utilities. And so our charge here at the task force, and our charge is WSP supporting the task force, is to figure out what changes need to happen to bring the overall regional water model to that of a world-class utility. And as you can see in the second bullet here, as we've discussed, any major change will result in legislative changes and negotiation of new agreements.
Yeah, actually, thank you. That's a good point, because I realized when we were discussing this earlier that one of the things that I left out of my introductory remarks was a reminder that there are some misconceptions out there that because the task force was created by General Assembly legislation, that we're making a recommendation to the General Assembly for subsequent legislation. That is not actually the case. The task force is required by the House bill to present its recommendations to the mayor, the county executive, and the governor. So the idea that what comes out of this is something that can be addressed through working through the county and the city and the counties and the city working together in some type of fashion may not require state legislation. And I just wanted to put that clarification out there, because I know that there have been some speculation and some assumptions made. But depending on what we come up with, it is possible that what we come up with can be worked out by agreements within the subdivisions and local legislation at the subdivision.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we wanted to kind of give a preview of some of the content for the next task force meeting before we move to our discussion. So the next meeting will be held on October 4th at the same time. It'll be at the Middle Range Fitness and Wellness Center located in Baltimore City. And as I've mentioned, the governance models are going to be the focus of that discussion. So we will be doing the follow-ups of what we've talked about here from meeting one and coming back to some of those topics. And then what we'll be stepping through are some of the governance models that we are considering for the task force. And so as part of that, going back to those criteria that we reviewed in the beginning with Xavier, we'll be looking at pros and cons of each of these governance models and our consideration and our outcome that we imagine happening as a result of that meeting. Is the task force becoming comfortable with those models or asking additional questions about those models so that we now together have a slate of governance models that are being studied for the subsequent phases of this task force work, which is mostly the fiscal analysis in the next stages. So we'll give you a little bit of a preview here on the next slide of some of the governance models that exist. And in general, as the chair kind of alluded to a bit, if you've seen one utility, you've seen one utility, right? So it is not possible to make an easy map and say there's 10 cities that are this model and 10 cities with this model. We are working at this time on studying cities that are similar in a variety of different ways to the broader Baltimore metropolitan region. And so we are looking at city utilities, we're looking at counties, other kinds of regional utilities for other places. And the Nugent report, business process review that we talked about does have some case studies of some of the utilities that you see on the screen and what models they use. In general, the two models that you see on the top of the slide, we're just relying on MOU. It's something that normally we've done. Okay, we have an MOU in the event of an emergency, and we can put these other utilities. I would be a step or 10 backwards from the model that we have now. So that is one that we don't imagine being on the plate for consideration. Cooperatives are not usually used in cities or urban areas that really work good. But the three models that you see detailed on the bottom are all ones that we imagine make sense in this region. And that's an intermunicipal service agreement, which is the current model. And that, again, doesn't have to be an as-is condition, right? The as-is condition of exactly what it is today is sort of the fourth scenario. An intermunicipal service agreement could exist with changes made. We talked about stormwater, we talked about other things and haven't been put in agreements that maybe are happening as a so the current model could be kept with looking towards updating those agreements. There's also a model called a wholesale service purchase agreement, working with the utility, contracting with the other utility. Right now we have a wholesale arrangement with other counties that are outside of New City and Baltimore County, right? And then the other model that we are considering is a special district or broader authority type model. So creating something that meets a specific purpose, but is operating independent of those geopolitical boundaries that exist presently, and then having the authority to raise and other items. There are many variations of these. There are models, some of these look kind of similar to other ones when you start breaking apart utilities. And that's some of the work that we're going to do in our next meeting. My colleague Ron Hartman is here. He's going to be helping us with the next meeting as well, and giving the task force the information that they need about these models and other places that use these models so that we can be prepared to know what models we need to study in the fiscal analysis.
So I always worry about whether or not I should give it to my inclination towards humor, but are we looking at any models north of the Mason-Dixon line? I mean, I'm getting occasional text messages, and I was acknowledging the fact that all the models that you've listed here, Henrico, Urbana, Cape Fear, all the ones from outside the immediate area are not really that far. They're Virginia and North Carolina. And so, first question, does anybody north of the Mason-Dixon line have water?
It freezes there, so it becomes more complicated.
Right?
I said it freezes there. So
It freezes. It used to freeze here too. I mean, I can't speak for this last winter, but the other one, more seriously and specifically, I was curious as to how water and wastewater are dealt with in St. Louis, because they're the only other city like Baltimore where the city is a separate subdivision from the surrounding county. And so I would is that something you guys know off the top of your head, or is that something that should be researched?
So we are working, let me answer the first question first, please. So these models that are on here are the ones that the public can read about in the business process report. Those are the case studies that were profiled. Part of our work is to do additional case studies.
Okay.
And we have a number of cities in mind. People have made suggestions of other ones, at different times to me as I've talked about this work with others. And we are also working on not going to the level of a case study for every jurisdiction, because it's a significant amount of resources and interviewing the utilities and things like that. But we have already produced, actually, we are looking at, we have about 20 to 30 entities. I won't say cities, but entities, utilities, where we have looked at, okay, what is their governance model? How do they set rates in that jurisdiction? We will add how do they address stormwater. And we also pulled a few cities internationally as well, just out of curiosity.
That's usually depressing. Maybe we should just stick to the continental United States.
So, somebody asked that.
Oh, okay, all right. But seriously, with St. Louis, I am very specifically curious. Also, and this is digging back into when I was an undergrad studying public policy, there were 6 cities that were independent of their surrounding counties in the United States, 6 of any size. There are now 2. 4 of them have consolidated with their county in the interim. It might be worth looking back at whether their water, wastewater system and how that was governed was, how that was handled before they consolidated, and whether that change precipitated the consolidations of the governments themselves, or was facilitated by the
Well, that's just largely how we have been having gone through that process. That's a good point, sure. Thank you.
Any other points to share? Leslie?
I'm curious about the difference between, I suspect that one just has a higher degree of legality and specificity, but the intermunicipal service agreement and the MOU, was that, and I'll disagree with this, but was the MOU kicked out just because it's just not as specific and legally binding as you want one of these modern day agreements to be?
Yeah, I think the reason to put that out is that intermunicipal service agreement would really be the way you would want to operationalize any kind of agreement between a separate entity. So an MOU is usually working towards a specific objective, or you provide mutual aid in the event of an emergency and things like that. So it doesn't have the same legal setup as the intermunicipal service agreement. And so in general, an MOU between 2 utilities wouldn't give you the backbone that we would do with the agreements to do things like that.
Right.
I would just add, I know you're looking, obviously, with these publicly entities that you put out to the public, but you're still looking at others. Also, I mean, we're talking about St. Louis is similar to older cities with older aging infrastructure. Some of these folks, these other authorities, newer places in the south that are growing with newer pipeline.
Had the advantage of setting up.
Correct. And so, there obviously, I don't think there's apples for apples, but things that are closer, again, northeast, parts of the Midwest, where Cleveland, Chicago, Buffalo, New York, whatever, where they have sort of a center that was the center, no longer maybe the center, and they're going out into surrounding jurisdictions and how they operate with each other. And as you were just to say, what is the workers' rights component that you have in one of your slides, or pension liabilities, the rights of employees, not just grievance procedure, but wages and other working conditions.
The only thing I'm a little concerned about in terms of the intermunicipal service agreement is that its description is as direct as maintain current structure while updating existing agreements, which sounds like a really fancy way of saying continue the status quo, which we're already kind of taking off the table. So I would say, I think you can take this one off because we're not going to be maintaining the current structure.
Yeah, I think the word structure can be taken in a lot of different contexts.
Okay.
So an attorney might see that word differently than we more operationally minded. Well,
Sorry.
But I guess a legal structure as opposed to an operational structure for employees are two different ways. But I think we can make that more clear when we talk through the next.
I guess if we're talking about, as long as we're clear that we're not talking about maintaining the current governance structure.
It is not the status quo.
Okay.
That's not.
And the other question I had about the cooperative model, the nonprofit private sector partnerships created to achieve a single goal. That seems to be a sentence which is completely separate from all customers of the cooperative are members, and each member has voting power, which it strikes me that those are two different concepts. What does that first sentence mean?
Residential based model. So there might be a cooperative, as it relates to agricultural access to water and things like that. So the customer is a large agricultural entity that needs water, crops and things like that.
But in theory, if I'm following this right, a cooperative could be the city and those counties that participate in using the water and wastewater, where the subdivisions themselves are the members and the customers.
I think that would be an extension of that, of the normal way that cooperatives are used, or primarily agricultural type of work. But part of what we're intending to do in the next meeting is to, not just push those two aside, but give a little more context to.
I will withdraw until we get that opportunity to see more about them.
Sure.
Thanks. Oh, Kelly?
Most of our discussion tonight has been talking about sort of local jurisdictional responsibilities, especially between Baltimore City and Baltimore County, which is one of the programs sort of key agreements between the city and the county. But I think in the back of our mind, as we think about governance models, we should also keep in mind that the state is involved with permitting of many of the facilities. And in the past couple of years, there have been major compliance issues. So I, for one, would be interested in knowing if any of these governance models have been proven to be particularly helpful in dealing with compliance issues that have come up.
We are at 7:43 for a discussion period that goes until 7:45. Does anybody on the task force have Keisha and
That means when they go to that, if they take a walk, stay wide for now and then go back and
Oh, I'm
forth
sorry.
between
I thought
those two. But if you
Keisha
take a
was moving
break,
Just a couple
and you-
questions. This term has come up a couple of times and I don't really understand where it fits into the whole schematic. Does that exist currently? It does.
Not in the form that, was originally out in 1972 agreement.
Yeah, leave that
The idea was that would be a.
no, go to
a joint
task force
force,
discussion, you're right.
For the, maintenance and expansion of the water system. Staff, I believe, definitely Baltimore County, Baltimore City, but also other surrounding counties that will receive part of that system.
Okay. And do they play a role in calculating?
Lauren wanted to add on.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
This is my answer, what you're gonna. They play a role in a lot of things. They play a role in the annual reconciliation process between the city and the county and what is used, who used it, where it was used. They play a role in every time there's a major break or something down where we can reroute the water to. I will say it is 100% staffed by Baltimore County at this point, and Baltimore County staff sit in a Baltimore City facility.
Okay. I did not see them on any of the organizational charts.
The staff that are there are actually under the Baltimore County chart, under the engineering section, under the water section within there. So they're not called out specifically because they're engineers from our water design section.
Add to that, you are 100% correct. But within the city structure, the water facilities division is where that planning and strategizing and troubleshooting happens, so that the county staff, as water division, are part of admin to the water facility division within the Bureau of Water and Wastewater.
Almost done it.
Senator Brett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two different types of questions. One of them, which is in reference to the presentation in totality as a whole. So when I looked on the websites, I saw the Nugent report, but I just wanted to be clear and understanding like the best practices that we're going to set. So it's a presentation from a public standpoint, going to be supplied on the websites, looking at the task force. I guess that's one question. I just think from a transparency, inclusiveness standpoint. That would be question number one. The second one was in reference to one of the statements that you made in reference to like local government and how they would be solving that problem. And I reflected on that for a period of time. I do think the state has a role in this.
Oh, great. It was not my intention to say that it had to be.
Right.
It was our intention of saying that our recommendation didn't have to require state legislation. That doesn't mean we can't.
So I wanted to lean in and lift up that the state makes significant capital investments to our water treatment facilities and the products that we have. But from an operating standpoint, that doesn't always exist. So you'll see that there's a small margin from an operating significant from a capital. And I think that when I toured a number of the facilities, one of them was competitiveness from our point of view in reference to employment and how we compete with our jurisdictions, state government included, our county included. And I do think that that should be one of the serious things that we look at. What is the state's role in reference to operating contributions that will make these infrastructure be successful?
I'm pretty sure we can recommend that the state put more money into. Not serious, not being funny, and we can recommend that. It just then it's on you guys to help us actually get that.
I think it's a certain amount of credibility that goes with a work group that's
Okay.
invested.
You don't have to tell me twice that we should ask the state for money. Yeah, no, don't. Delegate Stewart.
I think the senator makes an excellent point, and historically under the Bay Restoration Fund, there has been a lot lot of investment in the facilities we're looking at in terms of equipment, other capital expenditures, but the operating support is, substantially less. So I do think that that's an issue that we should take a look at and maybe, see, how much operating support the state does provide. And, that could be part of our recommendations as to how to increase that. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been a couple references to sometimes there's not enough hands to do the work, and then work is privatized. There's vendors on demand who come in. If the pipe is too big in Baltimore County, that it's automatically dispatched, that it's an outside contractor. Obviously the bulk of the employees are public employees, but figuring out what's the split in the cost. That are we losing something, especially with inflation and market rate contracts right now, that are frankly outpacing what the public employees are making? How much money in outside vendors are we spending to operate, maintain, and fix the system? And I don't know if it's significant. Getting to the bottom, it seems like an important figure where money's outflowing.
I'm sorry, I was also reminded that I didn't finish addressing question number one for the senator, which is if WSP can work with the city and the county to make sure that these slides make it onto the website. And I don't know if it is possible in terms of your production process, but if they could make it for future meetings, if the slides could go up before the meeting so that the public can have a chance to sort of see a preview of what this week's or this meeting focus is going to be.
To get a preview.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. So
Now that we're rolling.
And Keisha, I will point out to Keisha, it is now 7:50, so we as a task force are talking into our violet break before public comment, and that's the disclaimer on it.
Well, I could send these, but just on the points that were made, because I made these notes earlier. I know that this presentation summarizes what's in the New General Report, but one of the things that it would be helpful to have broken out is a specific kind of quad on service delivery by itself. And I know that we're here to address the issues, but I also think that it's equally important because I think it's the public should know and the folks that are in the Bureau, in the county's board structure that are currently working, that they know how important it is to address the needs of the existing staff, because there is a need for training, there's a need to identify career progression opportunities. So all of those things that are related to the existing employees and the existing operations and how the state might be able to help invest in the existing staff is also important as we're looking at making changes to the structure.
And I'm going to be very brief so we can have a final break, but is it possible that we can also receive information on, some of the headwinds that lie there for the utilities? Capital costs have increased, inflation, the cost of capital has increased, O&M has increased as well. And there's going to be some staggering costs with consent orders and consent decrees that as we look to figure out the model, we must really understand what the next 10 years lies ahead for this utility, so that we can prepare as a task force to be thinking about those things as we make those decisions, because there are very large capital costs ahead.
That is exactly why I made the statement I made about rate sufficiency as well as rate stability. Okay, before we start, I will remind everybody of the basic ground rules. 2 minutes per person. for questions or comments. We are not going to be doing dialogues. You may do a comment. You may ask a question. If you ask a question that is answered right here and now, you do not get a follow-up. You do not get a clarification. If you have follow-up questions to the question you asked, please submit it electronically. If your question is something we can answer in a pretty straightforward fashion right now, we will. If your question is more complicated than that, we will log it essentially, and we will present the answer at the next meeting as part of, I guess, again, the presentation at the beginning of the next meeting. So with those ground rules, oh, do we have a microphone for the person who's asked? What I'm going to do is I'm going to read out 3 names. You will come up in the order that I call, and then I will read 3 more names, and that way we will have a little bit less, wait time in between. So the first 3 people providing comment or asking questions are Janelle Edmonds, Bill Gooden, and Antoinette Ryan Johnson. So then we'll do Bill Gooden, Janelle Edmonds, Bill Gooden, Antoinette Ryan Johnson, and Wayne Jamil. Yep. Okay. All right, Bill, take it away.
Hey, first, thank y'all for this here task force. I hope it's worth what I come here for. I'm from Baltimore City. My complaint is this. I know that the city is up under a consent decree to fix the infrastructure. When we had quarterly bills 5 years ago, I paid $70 every 3 months. I'm paying $122 a month, which is 5 times more than what I used to pay, and the city tried to justify that in terms of that, and I still don't understand it. So please explain to me why people spend 5 times more for a water bill than what they used to pay just a couple years ago.
Okay. Anybody who actually works for city or county DPW, you want to take the first swing at that? Because absent that, I will give a much less enjoyable answer. So the answer that I have been given when I have asked that in the big picture is that we went a long time where the city did not raise the water rates, even though the cost of doing things was going up, and even though we were not doing the level of preventive maintenance that we should have been doing if we wanted to take care of a water and wastewater system that we started building right after the Great Fire in the early 1900s. So, because we went a long time not properly taking care of things, we are now stuck being the generation that pays the price for the fact that previous generations didn't do what they should. It's not good news, it's not pleasant, but that is part of the reality that we live with. And as I said at the beginning, we can't really engage in dialogue.
We're not going to debate. I just have to say one thing on my thing. So basically what you're saying is that the infrastructure, then y'all passing that cost onto the citizens because it's something that hadn't been done in a long time. Yes. So I'm saying, but at the same time, you're overpricing citizens, but now people can't even pay the water bill, so you're gonna make a decision, you gotta pay my water bill, or you gotta get my medicine. And I'm saying, somebody from this task force should be trying to deal with that situation to make sure that citizens can pay their water bill.
Thank you. Anthony?
Good evening, Chair Henry and the members of the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Task Force. My name is Brian Johnson, and I am I'm a resident of Baltimore County, Rosedale, where my family and I have lived for 24 years. I grew up in Baltimore City's McElderry Park neighborhood and the proud graduate of Baltimore City Public Schools, and I am the president of the City Union of Baltimore, a union of over 3,000 Baltimore City and Baltimore City school system employees in which over 400 of those members work to provide water and wastewater services to residents throughout the region. On behalf of these city employees who have worked long hours and at times at risk to their own health and well-being, I ask that the task force address a number of concerns the City Union of Baltimore members have as the task force endeavors to review the governance structure of the future of Baltimore Water. The recommendations of the business process study upon which this task force plans to act has noted a number of issues that should be addressed with respect to the water system. I realize many elected officials believe staffing issues can be handled separately, from a robust discussion on the organizational model of the current water and wastewater utility. But I assure you, any attempt to address organizational shortcomings of our water system that does not address glaring red flags and what I will call a staffing crisis is doomed to failure. The very same business process study itself handles a number of these staffing problems under the heading Organization Findings and Observations, noting that vacancy rates in water and wastewater systems in the city and county are both higher than usual. Salaries for city and county employees are woefully inadequate, thus causing many high-quality employees to leave for greener pastures and higher turnover rates, whereby several key workers with long-standing knowledge of how the system operates leave city employment because of substandard working conditions.
That's technically time. How much more do you have?
I can cut it in like 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Yes. The work of this task force must keep these deeply troubling concerns in mind if it wants to create a successful model moving forward in delivering water and wastewater services. Many employees have expressed concerns regarding a lack of certainty on the future of the city's water and wastewater department, and these uncertainties can exacerbate these problems. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. And then the next three will be, is it Laura Smith? Yes. David Wheaton and Tamar Lloyd.
My name is Wayne Gettle. I'm a licensed superintendent of wastewater treatment plant for 15 years, a chemical engineer, and property manager of the rental project. County bills sewer charges once a year in property tax. The city, I believe, includes the cost of sewage in the bill, which makes the city bills 4 times higher. The result of that is the people in the county don't recognize the full cost of their water. They just don't see it. Billing for rental properties on their water usage is complex. To say, oh, I got my tax bill, you're going to have to pay all this money for the sewer. You try and guess at what it's going to be and spend it out. You just absorb the costs. It could be much simpler. The county should include the cost of sewage in the water bill as you go through figuring this out. I think it's an easy thing to do, and this is probably the proper way to implement it. One of the things that happened to me, I bought a property that was vacant for 5 years. I got the property tax bill and they said, your sewer charge is $300. I'm like, the water pipe hasn't even been hooked up for 5 years. How do I owe $300 for sewage? And I went and I talked to someone in the county office and they said, our system doesn't handle zero very well. They gave me a $300 credit. But again, there's an issue there that needs to be looked at. There's a minimum charge for the water bill. And I suspect they're going off of, well, your water bill was this, we'll take that times 3. If you didn't use any water, should you be paying for water you didn't use just to have a minimum charge being booked to the city?
That's fine.
That's it.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, my name is Lawrence Smith, and I have a show called Seniors Taking Action. I'm concerned about the seniors. I mean, we raise these water rates, and I get a message today that there's $7 million that hasn't been collected by the city of Baltimore that has to do with housing authority. I know we had the Ritz-Carlton they left without paying the city. I know we had Duffer Steel that left without paying the city. We need to take this serious because water is vital for our people. And seniors are not getting any more on their checks. And they're losing their houses because of these bills. And it's not really our fault. It has to do with the billing department. It has to do with you guys put those new meters in that you were supposed to be able to read those meters from your department without sending anybody else in. And we haven't forgotten that. Baltimore is suffering a terrible impact. And I hope you guys take it serious at the next meeting to see how we can have some release for our seniors. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that wasn't a question, but I will take the point of saying at the Baltimore City level, I know there are programs to help seniors that are on fixed income. We have a Water for All program, and if anybody here has specific questions about it, there's a nice young man in a bow tie here smiling who would be happy to talk to you after the meeting. I'm not as personally familiar with whether Baltimore County has separate programs or if seniors in the county can use the city program. But I know that is something that we will be addressing in our recommendation discussion, is the concept of equity when it comes to repayment. All right, Mr. Wheaton.
Thank you, task force members, for allowing public comment. I just have two kind of comments for the consultant. One, when you do look at different cities, please add Detroit and Birmingham. When Detroit moved to their regionalization system, it caused mass shutoffs, and again, another majority Black city. And then in Birmingham, when they moved to their regionalization system, we found that 1 in 5 Black Birmingham residents had their water shut off. So just to see kind of what not to do in that regionalization system as if the task force moves to a regionalization system. And another thing to look at for Detroit, Detroit actually receives lease payments, and that's another revenue generator that can go in and help for affordability programs so that people aren't paying $100 and they have actually help pay for their water bills. And so my questions are I have two questions. One is we've talked a lot about equity, and wanting to know if the consultants or the task force is going to do any type of racial equity study when it comes to different governance models that have been chosen. We know that Baltimore's water quality and affordability have a detrimental and a disproportionate impact on Black Baltimore residents. About 108 census tracts that are majority Black and brown have found to have high levels of water affordability. And so just making sure that there's some type of equity study that's going to be done to make sure that whatever governance model is chosen does not keep that disproportionate impact, does not exacerbate that disproportionate impact as well. And then the second thing, you talked about the Water for All program. Is the task force going to make sure that Water for All protections and shutoff protections for folks that are making less than 120% AMI are kept into that governance model? So whatever governance model is chosen, we make sure that those shutoff protections and the Water for All program can continue. Those are things that the task force are going to be considering when it chooses different governance models. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, that was exceptional. 1 minute, 57.8 seconds. Second, I do want to address at least one of your questions, possibly two, with in terms of has WSP already? Do you already have it in your scope to try to do some type of racial equity study as part of what you're giving us for background?
I don't know if it's by name that way, but it is intended that, and I believe actually requires in the bill, that in looking at the fiscal implications of these, that those kind of considerations are included. So I explicitly no, but implicitly yes.
Okay, so I can tell you, well, that's the answer to the first one. For the second question of will there be an equity component to our recommendation, I can't guarantee that at this point because the recommendation hasn't been agreed on, but I can guarantee that it will be discussed. So, sure. We're gonna pause for a second.
I thought that, I believe that Mr. Lawrence asked a great question in reference to billing and collections. I see it's in the government model. I woke up to the same article about the $7 million compared to the previous ones that he had discussed. So I just want to be clear, like, are we going, when you do the governance model, and I see that you have it for billing and collections, but will you dig into like government, large corporations, non-payment, how is this handled in other jurisdictions, how we should move forward?
Yeah, so the fiscal analysis would include looking at all types of customers and looking at non-revenue water, non-payment, other types of collections, all those parameters that you call out.
At the risk of going into discussion, I will say that there's a kind of a fuzzy line between looking at governance models and looking at governance models that have been particularly successful at addressing operational challenges that we face. So I guess if I could be more explicit about the senator's request, if there are case studies out there of water systems that have been previously bad at collections, but somehow improved, what were the underlying factors of them improving that particular aspect? And are they things that we can, for lack of a better term, hardwire into a governance?
Yeah, we have knowledge.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Joe Boyd. I'm organized with the Food and Water Watch. I'm representing Food and Water Watch today, as well as 10,000 plus members in the Baltimore region. I just want to say very quickly that we are encouraged. I promise we will not be selling Baltimore's water infrastructure and processing in that manner. We're also concerned about the potential for P3s of public-private ownership partnerships. We do believe they could still potentially roll back very important protections that are very hard fought for, such as the ban on water shutoffs, the city's income-based water billing program, and any of the practice of putting liens on houses for unpaid water bills. We want to make sure these protections will remain in place regardless of the recommendation that is made by the tax force. I did want to ask, will there be a discussion?
Again, not unlike my answer to Mr. Reed, I can't guarantee you what our recommendation will be, but I can guarantee you that those items will be discussed. I have not talked individually with task force members about that particular topic, but I can say as an individual task force member, I intend to recommend that whatever governance model we come up with, we try to bring along as many of the existing programs at the city level that are in place specifically to help on an equitable level. I will personally advocate for bringing those on to whatever governance model we do have.
And because Chair, I would just say, you were very clear in your introductory remarks, and the mayor and the county executive have been clear that privatization is not. It is, and a public-private partnership is
true. But the way I took your question was, to some extent, we can say we're not going to recommend privatization, but that saying we're not going to recommend privatization, the next step to that is recommending that whatever governance model we come up with, we recommend that they hardwire into their operational model, not privatizing and not doing any type of extensive.
Right. Understanding the authority of what you have.
Yeah. Thank you. I've fallen down on my calling out names in advance. Okay. I'm sorry, Portland, Merca. From MVLS. Okay. How bad was I with that name pronunciation? Okay. And then followed by Robert McMenamin. Okay. And then Martin asked any plans to install meters. Is he still here? Did he ask that question? Did he write that in because he had to leave? Okay. then we'll just go with Portland Rock.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for my name is Corbin Merkel. I'm a staff attorney for Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. Our service is a
you just speak right into it.
Sorry. Our service is a nonprofit organization that helps remove barriers to justice through free civil legal help. At MLS, we see firsthand how water affordability disproportionately affects Black Baltimore residents. The task force is responsible for being a representative of the ratepayers of Baltimore City and County, and it is also responsible for coming up with the best governance model. So you kind of already answered this question, but so will the task force do any racial and economic equality analysis of the governance models before one is chosen?
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. All right.
I'm Robert McMillan, just a citizen here in Baltimore County. Some of my points were have been brought up before. One is the property tax that Baltimore County pays for water. How we're going to manage that? Is it just going to roll out and then it will be paid an equitable amount on our quarterly bills or not?
Yeah, that hasn't been.
I know.
That hasn't been discussed.
I know. That's higher up. I also say that the meters need to be something that put on like the top list after the governance is in there, so we know who is actually using what kind of water and how to be equitably billed for it. Example is nonprofits in Baltimore County do not pay any property tax. So if we go to a full metering system, it will be a surprise to them because they will not even pay that amount. They don't. Nonprofits do not pay.
Oh, don't worry. We know that nonprofits don't pay property tax. That's not a county problem.
Right.
That's actually a really big problem in the city.
I want to get down for 50 seconds. To give a real broad impression here is, I belong to a church. We have a 4-inch line. They charge $1,500 a month out of the quarter for water. There's only 3 people living there. The city PW says we can't charge you anything less because you have a 4-inch meter. So the question is you need to tell me in this day and age we can't have meters that have a better. I don't know.
You can pay to get a smaller meter if you need less water.
Yeah, but they have to have a 4-inch line because they have for fire service. For fire service. Yes. So that's the thing. And the last thing was, oh my God. Oh, but when you talked about the sewer system, is that because we have a combined sewer system that's different than Howard County? Because Howard County has their sanitary sewer is completely separate from their storm sewer. Sometimes our rainwater goes into the sanitary.
Yeah, the Baltimore City County system is not a combined sewer system. So that is one of the great things we do have going for us, is that we don't have stormwater and sewer combined together on purpose anywhere.
Yeah, there.
Yeah. So then, okay, and then we talk about how much money you want to pay for storm sewer, which should be infrastructure of subdivision versus sanitary sewer, which is what we need for recreation.
Thank you. All right, that is, okay, I will read the last question as much as I can. Are there any plans to install meters so residents can sign up for service? I'm not sure how to interpret that question. It looks like it says, any plans to install meters so residents can sign up for service? And
not that I kind of know what they have to be a president of the association. They will do is what you want what's their buildings, but the individual units are needed.
Yeah. That is not something that we're going to be addressing.
No.
Okay. Jim.
I have a question.
Oh, okay. Oh, you came in late. I'm sorry. Skip.
My name is David McSpade,
Well,
resident.
just lift the microphone up because you're way taller than it was expected. Okay.
Thank you. My name is David McSpade. I'm a Baltimore County resident. My question is, are you going to continue capital improvement projects and preventive maintenance in this interim period between now and when you?
I don't even have to look to either side. Yeah. Yeah. We got to keep doing, I mean, the water's got to flow. Like, so we're going to continue to do the best job we can do, you know, until we have something else in place. And even then, whatever recommendation we come up with, it's unlikely that it's going to significantly change the people involved in actually doing the work, at least not in any short period of time. So, yeah, we're going to keep doing the work.
It does change how the work gets paid for. That's why I was concerned things weren't paid for.
That will be something that will have to be worked out post recommendation. That's an implementation problem. And if I can try to keep a straight face during this, our job is to just come up with a good system. It's going to be other people's jobs to actually implement.
Great. Thank you guys so much for taking on our problem.
Can I just answer a little bit on that to squash your concerns from the county side? If it's a project that is only serving the county pays for it right now. So those would continue, or, you know, during this interim, during whatever's happening, because the county has budgeted for that in our capital plan. You can see our capital plan on the website. You can see what projects are funded. Those are moving forward.
And those capital plans that all from both the jurisdictions, part of the fiscal analysis as we look at obligations and what work needs to be done as part of that later part of the work.
Both subdivisions have capital plans that go far enough out. I don't expect that what we come up with can be implemented. I can't even figure out how that would work such that it would interfere with us doing the work. I think we'll be fine. Will we potentially be in a position to do more work faster and more efficiently because we come up with a better system? Maybe, but we certainly won't fail to do the work we're doing because we're trying to improve the government.
Great, thank you, and thank you all for taking on this very important problem.
Thank you. And as I'm sure you heard from my phone, I think we're good now on time, unless there was anybody else who had wanted to contribute something. I think we made a good start tonight, and we will be reconvening on October 4th, that's also a Wednesday, 6 p.m. at the Middle Branch Fitness and Wellness Center on Reedford Avenue in Baltimore.